Hello, you are on Initiative Africa. My name is Asha. Welcome to your weekly magazine featuring Africa on the move through smart innovations and initiatives that work. On our show today, our guest this week is Nyagale Bagayoko, Doctor of Political Science, graduate of the Paris Institute of Political Studies, researcher and the Institute of Development Studies in the United Kingdom. Passionate about international relations, she is recognized worldwide for her expertise in security and conflict prevention in sub-Saharan Africa. Author of numerous works, she is since 2008 president of the African Security Sector Network.
À mon avis, dans ce qui se produit.
Opinion in what is happening today, there's a very strong anti-colonialist, post-colonial rhetoric with a will, whether conscious or not, to take some sort of revenge on the former colonist and on the state model that it promotes today.
Sur le modèle d'État qu'il promeut aujourd'hui.
Seeds that are worth gold. From Africa to Asia and Europe, sesame is the oil crop that is flourishing. It is a growing sector in Burkina Faso.
You sell all the sesame you can produce. There are no slumps in sales, and it's not difficult to grow. It needs less fertilizer and less physical effort.
Can large companies be also development players? Well, it turns out to be true in Mozambique, with the sugar manufacturer Ilovo striving to reconcile business and social support.
And as I said before, as the Ilovo Group, and which we have adopted at Maragra, is the strategic intent. Part of that is to be welcome in the communities in which we operate, and we achieve that by having a social responsibility program.
Sesame, this oilseed plant cultivated for its seeds, is today the second export product of Burkina Faso after cotton. It can represent up to nearly 60 billion CFA francs in terms of annual export earnings for the country, a very dynamic sector that relies on young people and women. We are following in the footsteps of Hadja Velega, one of the pioneers in the sector and restaurant owner, Mrs. Sandwidi, with our journalist David Thiombiano.
Sowampa Tankoano gets around on a high-motored motorcycle, a must for wealthy farmers like himself. Soon he will be moving into a bricks and mortar house he had built on his plot of land at Fada Ngoma in eastern Burkina. The key to his fortune is 10 kilometres away in a field. The sesame to success.
I harvested 7 tons of sesame last year. I make a good living and can afford healthcare, put food on the table, help fix machinery, and pay my children's school fees.
The market rate for sesame varies from 70 cents to $1 a kilo, making it the most profitable crop in Burkina pound for pound. In 2013, the price per kilo reached $1.70. With prices like this, little wonder there's a sesame rush on.
En 2008, nous avons commencé le sésame.
We began working with the sesame sector in 2008. There were 700,000 registered producers in Burkina Faso at that time. Now there are 1.2 million.
2014-2015, on en a dénoté 1,200,000, ce qui représente une augmentation de 60%.
That's a 67% increase.
À cette même période, la production nationale
The 2008 harvest was 30,000 tons.
En 2008. Et la campagne qui vient de s'écouler, les chiffres.
The figures we have for the current campaign are in the region of 320,000 tons.
321,000 tonnes et quelques, ce qui fait que une production, une augmentation de près de 10
That's a tenfold increase.
fois plus que la quantité de départ.
In just a few years, sesame has become the country's third biggest export after gold and cotton. In 2013, it brought in earnings of $127 million, making Burkina the world's 8th biggest exporter.
You sell all the sesame you can produce. There are no slumps in sales, and it's not difficult to grow. It needs less fertilizer and less physical effort. Basically, it's a game changer for farmers. I call it Burkina's other white gold.
In the sector, Hadja Velegda is something of a pioneer. Each year she dispatches over 20,000 tonnes of the seeds to China and Japan. Hadja knows that standards have to be high, and that means no pebbles, no leaves, in fact no foreign bodies of any kind. She learnt her trade alongside the mentors from the Ministry of Agriculture, with technical support from the ADP GIZ Agriculture Development Programme. ADP GIZ was developed to help producers, traders and processors.
Depuis 2008, le PDA a travaillé.
Since 2008, the ADP has been working to encourage producers to increase yields and improve the quality of their sesame harvest.
La qualité de leur sésame à travers les formations sur les itinéraires techniques, à travers la mise à disposition.
The program provides high-quality seeds as well as training on technical matters and helping producers get better organized.
À travers une meilleure structuration des producteurs à la base.
Despite a determined quality drive, an incident in 2014 nearly stopped the booming sector in its tracks, when traces of pesticide were discovered in shipments to Japan. The president of the Association of Sesame Traders and Exporters points out that this was an isolated incident that should not taint the good reputation of the whole sector.
Burkina's sesame is good quality, but some careless exporters here have sent the seeds without selecting them properly. Some people have even mixed sand with the sesame to sell it. That's why in Japan they were saying that sesame from Burkina was not up to standard. We looked into it and found out that 1 or 2 containers were at fault. We've been working in this sector for more than 20 years and we have never had to deal with problems like this. Was it deliberate sabotage? I can't say.
When the market rate fell in 2014 from $1.70 to $1, some producers started to panic. The big question now is how long this golden age will last. Domestic consumption accounts for just 50 tonnes, hardly 1% of national production. The sector's future depends on Bernicabés getting a taste for sesame.
One thing we have to do is to stimulate national consumption. That is vital. We need more processing facilities in Burkina Faso so we can create added value. At the same time, this will create jobs.
With a little imagination, the grains have 1,000 uses. In her restaurant at Fada Ngoma, Mrs. Sandwidi's speciality is rice with sesame.
Rice and is easy to make and natural.
C'est vraiment naturel. Il suffit de mettre de l'eau dans la marmite.
You pour water into a pan, add some diced onions, a spoonful of sesame paste, bring it to the boil, and add the sesame grains.
There are some new sesame-inspired recipes every day. These culinary innovations put something different on your plate, keep the sector on its feet, and help Burkina fulfill its huge potential.
As I mentioned earlier, our guest this week is Nyagale Bagayoko. She is Franco-Malian and is one of the best specialists in security issues and conflict prevention in the Sahel, a topic making the headlines almost every day. Nyagale is very often on the field to better analyze the situations and meet the populations, and she has a strong expertise in crisis areas and the recognition of large organizations. Even if her analysis sometimes goes beyond agreed theories, she agreed to answer to François Baudry's questions.
Nyagale Bagayoko, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Merci.
Nyagale Bagayoko, welcome to Initiative Africa.
Vous êtes une experte en matière de
You are a security expert on African issues. and also presiding a think tank, the African Security Network, for 15 years, which is responsible for analyzing the assessments carried out on security policies that are adopted by states and organizations.
Par les États, par les organisations, etc. Et alors donc, moi j'ai une première question, en profitant de votre présence.
Could you give us a global picture of the security situation in the Sahel?
De la situation sécuritaire au Sahel.
Alors je pense qu'il est avant tout important.
Well, I think we need to approach the situation through the word complexity.
Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il est
Because today it's very difficult to consider what's happening under a single prism, particularly under the single prism of the fight against terrorism,
de la lutte antiterroriste, qui est évidemment
which is obviously part of the landscape and the problem.
Aujourd'hui, on se trouve dans un environnement.
Today, we find ourselves in an environment which, in my opinion, can be described as insurrectionary in various respects. In other words, we are facing the proliferation of armed groups supporting different claims, causes, which could be related to jihadism indeed, but also irredentist or even pro-independence or separatists. Other groups which do not carry specific political claims, also, but which have been set up to ensure the security of the populations themselves, which results in the communitization of this security, and hence we are facing the proliferation of criminal groups. So the environment is extremely multifaceted, hence the difficulty in finding suitable answers to deal with them.
Who are these West African terrorists?
In my opinion, we need to consider the current threat as a combination of exogenous and endogenous variables. The origin of the crisis that erupted in North Mali in 2012 was expressed by the influence taken by the armed terrorist groups who had been pushed back into the Malian sanctuary from Algerian territory. The hairs behind the AIG, the Armed Islamic Group, and the SGPC, the Salafist group for preaching and combat, who have now converged under the Akim banner, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. There was also, of course, an influence from the Libyan crisis and the collapse of the Muammar Gaddafi regime, which favored the return to the country of the Tuareg armed groups with rather nationalist demands. So we have these different types of actors united within the coalition called the GSIM, Group for Support of Islam and Muslims, which is led by Iyad Aghali, and which regroups a certain number of other formations, in particular the Katiba Machina in the center of Mali.
D'autres formations, notamment la Katiba du Massina dans le centre du Mali. Mais il y a également dans la région.
But there's also in the region another very influential group today, and against which the French army is fighting, which is the West African Sahara branch of the Islamic State, which has set up a province called ISWAP, the Islamic State in West Africa province, on which depend both ex-groups attached to Boko Haram, therefore in Nigeria, and in the regions of the Lake Chad Basin.
West Africa province, dont dépendent à la fois les ex-éléments rattachés à Boko Haram, donc au Nigeria, et dans les régions.
And on the other hand, the Sahelian branch, which is embodied by the Islamic State in the Grand Sahara organization led by Abu Walid al-Sahrawi.
Dirigé par Abu Walid al-Sahrawi.
Donc ce que vous êtes en train de dire, c'est que
So what you're saying is that there is not one kind of terrorism, but there are several groups in sub-Saharan Africa, hence the difficulty in fighting them.
de les combattre.
Alors, absolument. Il y a la complexité dont je parlais.
Absolutely. This is what I meant by the complexity. We spoke about it earlier, but which is also valid inside of all of these groups. We're starting to see confrontations between certain groups in certain parts of the Sahel, especially in the center.
Et notamment au centre. Alors, par exemple, si on prend le cas de la Katiba.
For example, if we take the case of the Katiba Machina, which is part of the JSIM, Group for Support of Islam and Muslims, we recently found that some of these movements came to join the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara because it is considered, on the one hand, that their approach was not effective enough on the field, but also because it disputed the way in which Amadou Koufa, who heads this Katiba Machina, tried to manage access to so-called burgu pasture lands, in other words, the management of natural resources in the area.
Pour résumer, la gestion des ressources naturelles dans la zone. Donc on voit très bien qu'à ces conflits.
So we can clearly see that these conflicts of a jihadist terrorist nature are grafted with issues that relate more to community issues, to resource management issues, to access to different facilities issues as well.
Également à différentes facilités.
Merci.
Thank you, Nyagale Bakayoko. See you after the break for the second part of our interview.
Welcome back on Initiative Africa. More and more large companies established on the continent are trying to reconcile turnover and social support for their employees. While the recent pandemics forced private companies to look into the health of their employees, the phenomenon has triggered awareness that blends both pragmatism and philosophy. Thus, certain groups are now also seeing themselves as actors of development. Example in Mozambique with the South African group Illovo, the continent's leading sugar producer. Take a look.
Welcome to the Maragra complex in Manhissa, a medium-sized town 75 kilometers north of Maputo, capital of Mozambique. This sugar factory got a shot in the arm in '98 with the arrival of the South African company Illovo Sugar. As well as an expansion program that has made it the continent's leading producer, the group has developed a social responsibility program in the 6 African countries where it is present, as here on its Mozambique site.
It has to be an integral part of your business. And as I said before, as the Illovo Group, and which we have adopted at Maragra, is the strategic intent. Part of that is to be welcome in the communities in which we operate, and we achieve that by having a social responsibility program.
Here in Maragra, you will not just see endless fields of sugarcane and sugar production facilities. There are also infrastructures for the employees, a school, a clinic, and ambulances. Every year, Illovo spends $250,000 on its social responsibility program.
We have here 4 nurses. Maragra, it's for Maragra contract. Maragra pay her salaries. When you sick, when the employee is sick, between the week from Monday up to Friday, we use clinic. At night or weekend, we use this hospital. The number one is malaria, and second one, sometimes when rain is too much, we have cholera. You know cholera, and maybe the third is AIDS.
To overcome the public health problems affecting the workforce, the group has also developed a certain number of anti-malaria and AIDS programs, an involvement that goes beyond questions of productivity and absenteeism.
That was the prime reason when I brought the malaria thing in. We just had such huge absenteeism as a result of malaria. The people here had come out of the years of the Civil War, so they were very poor to start with. They weren't very well nourished, and of course with this debilitating malaria disease, really affected their general health and what they were able to achieve. So we put the program in an effort to boost their general health, first of all. Obviously, we look at a spin-off of productivity. You just have people at work instead of at home sick. And I say so, but again, it wasn't a question of just we had to have productivity. There was a malaria problem in this area.
On this site, Illovo has 6,300 hectares of sugarcane. Each year, they produce around 60,000 tons of sugar thanks to an effective drainage and irrigation system using the natural resources of the Inkomati River. In 2000, most of the production was wiped out by dramatic floods that hit large parts of southern Mozambique. Thanks to a European Union loan, Illovo was able to continue its development. The company is now the region's main employer, a heavy responsibility to bear.
The site here, we employ 1,200 permanent employees, both in agriculture and in factory and in other areas such as security, warehousing, clinics, schools, and mechanical workshops and so on. And at the height of the season, we will employ about 3,500 seasonal workers bearing in mind a season here is about 7 months long. We do have a heavy responsibility, and one of the actions there, of course, is where we recognize that is in agriculture, where we have no laid down specific mechanization policy at this point in time.
The workers at Maragra earn an average monthly wage of $350. The average annual wage in Mozambique is $250. They also have a number of social advantages, including free drinking water and electricity. They are well aware of their privileged situation.
Cold water, and this one is like at school, they depending on the world program of food. So that is helpful to more of the children. They've got no conditions, and that is supporting a lot. Yes, there's a big difference. We got electricity and water, and we don't pay for the water and electricity. People living in the outside, they use the firewood, they fetch water from the well. That water is not treated.
Determined not to stay an oasis of plenty in the heart of a desert, Ilavo is working with local authorities to extend these advantages to the inhabitants of the region, employees or not. The school is open to children from all over Manhissa. However, the impact of the social situation is clear in the classroom.
Students and people from the company, they speak Portuguese. Students from the outside, most of the time they live with grandparents. Their level of understanding makes things very difficult. You have to start from the beginning, teach them how to say door, nose, and head.
But again, you take Mozambique, as a company came out of a long civil war and so on, and it's just impossible to do everything at once. It's going to take the government a long time. And if we can aid and help with that within the limits of our budgets and so on, that's what we do. The shareholders have not got any money out of Maragra yet, but we spend money, they agree to spend money on that program every year.
Ilavo did not choose Mozambique out of kindness. The climate, the soil, and the government's price support policies promised a fruitful long-term involvement. Nonetheless, here, as in its other host countries, the company is working to keep both shareholders and sugar workers happy, even if that means temporarily lending a hand to a state gradually finding its feet after a long and difficult period.
In the second part of this week's interview, Nyagale Bagayoko shares her analysis on the security crisis in the Sahel.
Welcome back to this second part of the interview with our guest, Nyagale Bagayoko. Why is it so difficult to fight them?
First,
because they don't have the same operational approaches, and this is where the use of the word terrorist can be interesting. I think that it must be handled with discernment, insofar as, in my opinion, terrorism is an operational method, which is by definition indiscriminate violence to civilians. Not all jihadist groups today use terrible violence against civilians. It's more often the case for troops affiliated to the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara.
Des troupes affiliées à l'État islamique au Grand Sahara. Donc on voit bien que
So, we can clearly see that we cannot confront groups in the same way to those who seek a cooperative approach with the populations and who seek to integrate, to anchor themselves in the local environment. And those in particular, I'll take the case of the Katiwa Machina again, and more generally an approach which seems to be that of the GSIM Group for Support of Islam and Muslims, which seems to target in a much more systematic way the representatives of the state. While the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara today seems to be using some of the methods which have been quite harmful for Boko Haram, which has since become ISWAP, Islamic State West Africa Province, and which consists in really terrorizing civilians, as we have seen recently in the north of Burkina Faso, where 35 men were sorted, there's no other word, separated from women and systematically killed on a marketplace in a village.
Éliminés dans un village sur un marché.
In the face of this situation, one would think that there would be some kind of harmonization within the positions of foreign powers to combat them. In fact, it's not really the case. And it even seems that there is a rather murky game of foreign powers, such as Russia, France, China. What can you tell us?
Alors je pense qu'on ne peut pas
I think that we cannot compare the concerns which in fact characterizes the position of Russia with that of France. I would describe France's position as quite complex for various reasons. First, because of course it is an old colonial power, and in my opinion in what is happening today there's a very strong anti-colonialist, anti-post-colonial rhetoric with a will, whether conscious or not, to take some sort of revenge on the former colonist and on the state model that it promotes today. The state, represented by elites who are considered to have failed and are discredited. So that's the position of France. Which is also complicated by the fact that there was this intervention in Libya, which is also constantly reminded by the heads of the state of the G5 of the Sahel region. There were also certain ambiguities which were criticized in France in its relationship with the Tuareg armed groups, which has sometimes been used to fight against jihadist groups. So that's it for France's position. As for the other actors, Russia does indeed have cooperation, for example, with the historical and traditional Mali, which dates back to the socialist era and which takes on a certain topicality since contracts have been signed, notably with the Wagner Company. This is for Russia, and some see behind the anti-France campaigns and not anti-French. I really care about the distinction, but against France, the hand of Russia and some kind of strategy of influence, I think that there doesn't necessarily need to have the hands of Russia for this great anger to be expressed.
And what about the Americans?
As far as the Americans are concerned, the question is quite different. I think there's a difference in analysis and perception of the strategic environment. The Americans seem to consider that what's happening in the Sahel is a local conflict in which it's better not to get involved within the framework of an international coalition, like in the Middle East. The American position today consists in deploying its military device in Africa. Military device which depends on the Africa Command, based in Germany. And therefore they would go as far as closing some bases, including the base of Agadez, which is extremely important from an operational point of view, in particular for France. The objective of the Americans is to counter Russia and China on the international scene, including in the parts of the continent where these two powers have economic interests mainly. So they are refocusing their attention on this problem that we seem to be witnessing today.
You were watching Initiative Africa. Well, that's it for today. If you want to catch the show again, tune in our Vimeo and YouTube channels. And we're back again next week, same time, same channel, with Business Africa and your appointment with the African economy. Stay tuned and send us your feedback on Twitter using the hashtag Initiative Africa TV show. Have a great week. Bye-bye.